Good evening, everyone. Today, I'm going to discuss on carotid artery aneurysms and dissections. And my stream of presentation will be going like in carotid aneurysms, I'll be discussing the definition, epidemiology, pathologies, clinical findings, followed by diagnosis and treatment. And in that, open and endovascular therapy, followed by carotid artery dissection, in which I'll be discussing the types of dissections and treatment. So these are the zones in the neck, like it is divided into three zones. There is zone 1, which extends from the cricoid cartilage to the sternal lodge, and in zone 2, it starts from cricoid cartilage to the angle of mandible, whereas in zone 3, it is from base of skull to the angle of mandible. And so the carotid artery origin, bifurcation, everything will be in these three zones. So coming to the carotid artery aneurysms, the causes of carotid artery aneurysms are mostly due to atherosclerotic degeneration, followed by traumatic injury, later dissections, and previously, historically, syphilis and middle ear infections as well as tonsillar infections used to cause carotid aneurysms. But of late, after the advent of antibiotics and other things, this cause has decreased. And lately, the incidence of carotid aneurysms due to repair of carotid artery for atherosclerosis, that is carotid endarterectomy, is being increasingly seen, and it is one of the most common cause of late. The incidence of carotid aneurysms is unknown, but it is generally less than 1% when compared to all other carotid artery diseases. And in carotid endarterectomy, the incidence is nearly 1 to 1.5%. So coming to the definition, generally carotid aneurysm is defined like when compared to the normal artery, adjacent normal artery. So if it is greater than 200% the diameter of internal carotid artery, or if it is 150%, more than 150% diameter of common carotid artery, then it is defined as carotid aneurysm. In 1806 and 1808, Sir Ashley Cooper first repaired the carotid artery. That is, in 1806 it was unsuccessful, whereas in 1808 it was successful repair. And Winslow has reported nearly 124 patients in 1925, out of which 82 carotid ligations were done, and the mortality was as high as 28% in this study. And first successful repair of carotid aneurysm was done in 1952 by Dimiza, and this was reported in 1955 by Shia. And prosthetic graft for the first time was used in 1959, and from 1990s endovascular techniques came into existence, and they are slowly taking over open surgical interventions because of less minimally invasive thing and lower complication rates. And coming to epidemiology, the incidence previously the incidence was mostly because of infections, that is mycotic aneurysms, and the age group was 20 to 40 years. Of late, atherosclerosis is the most common cause, and the incidence is the age group is more than 60 years, and males and females are equally affected. But in true aneurysms, male preponderance is seen, that is 2:1 ratio. And other aneurysms which might be caused spontaneous, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, neurofibromatosis, and Behçet's disease. These are the connective tissue diseases, which also might lead to carotid aneurysms. And in these aneurysms, generally autologous vein should not be used for repair, because the vessel also might be diseased, and chances of recurrence are very high if autologous vein is used in these patients. And coming to the pathogenesis, etiology, the one of the most common cause of carotid aneurysms is degenerative, that is atherosclerotic cause, and it is nearly 40 to 70% cases of aneurysm are because of this atherosclerosis. These are true aneurysms, and it is mainly because of disruption in the internal elastic lamina as well as thinning of the media. This is a kind of fusiform type of aneurysm, and it is mostly seen at the bifurcation of common carotid artery as well as proximal internal carotid artery. And if these bifurcation and proximal internal carotid artery are not involved, then the other aneurysms are mostly saccular type of aneurysms. And if non-traumatic cause of bilateral aneurysms is mostly because of saccular aneurysms when they are not present at the bifurcation as well as internal carotid artery. And coming to the traumatic causes, it accounts for it is one of the most common cause, and 12 to 17% of the penetrating neck injuries, the involvement of carotid artery is seen. And the common carotid artery is the most commonly injured artery post trauma. And iatrogenically also, it is the artery which is most commonly involved during IJV catheterization and other things. And when considering all the patients with blunt cerebrovascular injury who are presenting to us, in that carotid aneurysm occurs in nearly 0.18 to 2.7% of the patients. And in blunt trauma involving the skull, the most common artery involved is the distal ICA, just below the skull. And these traumatic dissections, whenever there is any traumatic dissection, these dissections also can degenerate and form aneurysms or pseudoaneurysms, which will later enlarge and might embolize thrombus into the brain, leading to neurological events, as well as they might even sometimes rupture if they are infected. So coming to the grades of pseudoaneurysms, if there is only intimal flap or intramural thrombus, then it is called as grade 1. And if the aneurysm is involving less than 50% of the circumference of the normal vessel, then it is grade 2. And if it is more than 50% of the circumference, then it is grade 3. And if there is any rupture or transaction, then it is grade 4, which needs emergency intervention. And if pseudoaneurysms which persist for more than a week, they might require treatment if it is grade 3. And coming, so these are the causes for atherosclerotic. Coming to the traumatic. Coming to the post-endarterectomy aneurysms, the most frequently reported aneurysm is external carotid artery aneurysm, because endarterectomy is mostly done over there. And L. Sabrout and Cooley demonstrated nearly 57% in 67 cases which they have studied. The incidence of aneurysm is seen in nearly 57% of the patients. And it is mostly because of either suture line failure or infection at the anastomotic site. So the other cause which might cause the aneurysm is arterial dysplasia. So this is mostly congenital, mostly because of fibromuscular dysplasia or connective tissue disorders. Mostly these dysplasias are seen as a stenotic lesion, as well with the dilatations like string of bead appearance will be seen, and these dilatations will finally lead to aneurysm, and the chances of rupture are also there with pseudoaneurysm formation in these cases. So coming to the histopathology, the most common cause is atherosclerotic. In that, there will be damage to the internal elastic lamina along with the thinning of intima, with foam cells, as well as accumulation of cholesterol and other hemosiderin in the media of the vessel. So coming to the clinical findings, the patient might be presenting with painless pulsatile mass in the neck, which is the initial presentation in 93% of the patients. And if it is infected, there might be tenderness and overlying erythema. And if internal carotid artery is involved, then the patient might be presenting with difficulty in swallowing, and when examined, there might be a tonsil mass in the tonsillar fossa. Generally, these patients are being referred from ENT surgeon when they examine the patient. So internal carotid artery, if it is involved, then the swelling will be extending into the inside the throat, whereas the external, this common carotid and external carotid artery, there will be swelling in the neck. So these patients mostly will be presenting with neurological symptoms. This is because of embolus of thrombus which is formed in the aneurysm. So the patients might be presenting with amaurosis fugax, transient ischemic attack, or in cases stroke, as well as Horner syndrome. This Horner syndrome will be like partial Horner's, that is, anhidrosis is not generally seen in these patients because the sympathetic fibers leading to anhidrosis are generally traversing the external carotid artery. So generally patients will be presenting with Horner syndrome, that is ptosis and meiosis. So, and these patients most commonly will be presenting with cranial nerve dysfunctions, but these cranial nerve dysfunctions are seen only in the patients who where the internal carotid artery is involved. So, the generally internal carotid artery enters skull through foramen lacerum and transits carotid canal in petrostemporal bone. So, this will be carrying along with it the sympathetic nerve fibers. So, whenever there is aneurysm, there will be compression of the sympathetic nerve fibers leading to a Horner syndrome. And if vagus nerve or recurrent laryngeal nerve is involved or affected or compressed, then it leads to hoarseness of voice. And patient might be presenting with severe facial pain when the trigeminal as well as facial nerve are involved. Facial nerve compression is there. So this is the image showing the relationship between carotid vessels as well as the nerves. Here we can see that vagus nerve is closely related with internal carotid artery as well as glossopharyngeal nerve and hypoglossal nerve are traversing the artery. So the other symptoms which might be present in these patients are dysphagia, and in few patients there might be in mycotic aneurysms, and other patients there might be hemorrhage. Initially, the patient might be presenting with Herald bleed, later leading to complete rupture and oropharyngeal bleeding. So these are mostly seen in mycotic aneurysm patients. So one more entity, that is carotid blowout syndrome. Generally, this is mostly seen in malignancy patients where there is extensive head and neck surgery along with radiotherapy. The most common risk factors are whenever there is a thrombosis of vasorum, that is the blood vessel supplying the carotid artery, so the vessel will get thinned out, which leads to blowout in these patients. And in some cases where there is direct exposure and of this carotid artery to saliva post surgery, so there also there might be rupture of the carotid artery leading to blowout. So all these conditions might be leading to carotid blowout, mostly seen in malignancy patients. So coming to the differential diagnosis, this any swelling in the neck can be, if it is pulsatile due to transmitted pulsations, can be considered as differential diagnosis. So like cervical lymph nodes overlying the carotid bifurcation, or carotid body tumors, glomus jugulaire, or brachial clefts and cystic hygroma may be considered as differential diagnosis for this carotid aneurysm. So coming to the diagnostic evaluation, initial investigation of choice is Doppler ultrasound, but CT angio or MR angio is mostly done in all the patients to find. So the advantage of MR angio and CT angio are that in MR angio, uh, the old as well as recent clots can be identified, and we can even see the dissection as well as the intracranial involvement of the aneurysm, and other things can be easily found out in this MR angio. And the advantage of CT angio is easy availability, time, as well as bony relations between the aneurysm as well. Bony landmarks can be easily marked, and procedure can be planned easily with this CT angio. And in few patients, previously catheter-based angiography was the gold standard. Of late, this CT angio is taken over this, and it is only done in patients where intervention cannot be planned, or if they are planned for ligation or some other procedure to check for the collateral circulation as well as the circle of Willis. We can once get this catheter-based angiography done, and based on that we can plan the procedure. So whenever this diagnostic angiography is done, uh, this we can along with this we can pass a end hole catheter, and we need to once occlude that side of the carotid artery and check whether the patient is having any symptoms or not. So if the patient is not having any symptoms, then we can go ahead and ligate the carotid artery. So before ligating in elective situations, we need to check the stump pressure of the carotid artery, as well as the acceptability of the patient, means how the patient should be monitored to find out any neurological deficits or symptoms. And if the mean systemic pressure, stump pressure, is more than 50%, then there is adequate cerebral blood flow from the opposite side. So we can go ahead and ligate this patient. So generally, this occlusion is performed for 30 minutes in an awake patient, and neurological assessment should be done. And even the blood pressure should be lowered in these patients to check whether hypotension is causing any neurological deficits. And generally, if after balloon occlusion, patient has some neurological deficits, that might be due to thromboembolism, and these patients should be managed with warfarin, anticoagulation with warfarin from 6 weeks to 3 months after ligation. So coming to the treatment of aneurysms, carotid aneurysms, the primary objective of the treatment for carotid aneurysms is to prevent permanent neurological deficits from the atheroembolism or thromboembolism, because rupture of carotid aneurysms is very rare and it is only seen in mycotic aneurysms cases. True aneurysm chances of rupture are very rare. So the main treatment in these patients is to prevent the thrombus which is present in the aneurysm sac to migrate into the uh, distal circulation and cause some neurological problems. So the main motto is to prevent that neurological deficits, and the choice of treatment should be tailored according to the need and the age of the patient, as well as the location of the aneurysm, size of the aneurysm, underlying cause, whether it is mycotic aneurysm or atherosclerotic aneurysm or traumatic and as well as the overall condition of the patient, whether the patient is able to tolerate the condition or not. So generally, in open surgical approaches, historically ligation was done, but of late ligation is not done after the invention of primary vessel repair as well as interposition grafts and endovascular things. Ligation is not done, but generally ligation is only done in emergency situations as a life-saving procedure when primary repair cannot be done or endovascular procedures cannot be done in those patients. Then only in emergency situations ligation is done. In elective situations, when the disease is very high and where we cannot do either open surgical repair or endovascular repair, we can go ahead and do ligation only after balloon occlusion test is done, and if there is good collateral circulation and circular release is normal, then only ligation should be done in these patients, or else it's better to go ahead and try to repair the vessel. So coming to the resection and the reconstruction, generally lesions of common carotid artery and proximal internal carotid artery can be easily approached, and resection as well as reconstruction can be done in these patients. But chances of cranial nerve injuries are as high as 44 to 20%. And in small saccular aneurysms, just primary closure or patch pasty can be done. And if the artery stretches, then good mobilization can be done, and end-to-end anastomosis can be tried if the artery stretches. And in case of infectious etiology, it's better to go and do autologous graft rather than to go ahead with the EPTFE graft. And in coming to the open surgical technique, generally it should be done in general anesthesia with cerebral monitoring. And if needed, selective shunting can also be tried with monitoring of carotid stump pressure. Exposure of distal ICA is a bit difficult. And in this subluxation and mobilization of mandible is needed to expose the distal internal carotid artery. And in these procedures, care should be taken to prevent injuries to the cranial nerves. So, in case of atherosclerotic aneurysm, complete excision of the aneurysm with a Cephalus vein or EPTFE patch can be done. And generally, endoaneurysmography is done to prevent adjacent cranial nerve injuries. And coming to the endovascular techniques, generally bare metal stents with trans stent coiling is tried, or else we can even use covered stents if feasible. And in few cases, percutaneous thrombin injection under US guidance for these traumatic pseudoaneurysms is also being done. So these are the images. In the first image, here a bare metal stent is deployed, and after that, through the stent, coiling is done. And in second image, after 6 months, there is good exclusion of the aneurysm from the artery, and the distal flow is very well established. And coming to the third and fourth images, here a stent graft is being used for a aneurysm of distal internal carotid artery with good exclusion of the aneurysm and flow to the brain. So in transstent coil embolization, generally aneurysm should be crossed with a O14 wire, and if possible, EPD can be placed. and a self-expanding stent should be deployed to exclude the aneurysm. And after that, a three-stent microcatheter can be passed, and through that, this coiling can be done through the stent, and it can be excluded. And these coils cannot be migrated because a stent, because already it is stunted and the stent is in situ. These coils cannot be migrated above and below. And coming to the stent graft coverage, if the vessels are not tortuous and if it is amenable or in distal ICA things, stent grafts can be used in all the fusiform aneurysms. And stent grafts should be selected in such a way that it should be the shortest length with good proximal and distal seal, because generally the arteries are very tortuous. If we take larger length, then deploying stent will be a bit difficult. So it's better to take shortest length stent as possible with good proximal and distal seal. We should not compromise with the sealing of proximal and distal thing. And contraindications for this stent grafting are tortuous carotid arteries, and if there is any thrombus in the aneurysm which is unstable, then during this manipulation, chances of migration of this unstable plaque distally and embolization chances are very high. So these are bit contraindications for stent grafting and endovascular thing. Coming to the treatment of carotid blowers, generally, if hybrid OT is available and if all the equipment is available, stent grafting can be done in all these patients. And adjunctive embolization of pseudoaneurysms is also with coil cell glues can also be done. But endoleaks of 8.5% are noted, and the success of this procedure is nearly 92.8%, and death is nearly 4%, and 15 months stent patency is nearly 93%. So coming to the medical management in patients with mycotic aneurysms who have infective etiology, it's better to start with medical management in these patients and then go ahead and do surgical procedure in these patients. So most commonly, Staph aureus and Staph epidermidis are the organisms which are isolated in these mycotic aneurysms. So a gram-positive coverage with vancomycin or linezolid is tried. But some studies have shown that gram-negative organisms like E. coli, Klebsiella are also seen in these patients. So gram-negative coverage is also done. So once this antibiotic coverage is done, we can go ahead and do debridement as well as autologous reconstruction with muzzle flap. And after that, culture sensitive antibiotics should be started in all these patients with injectable antibiotics for a period of 1 to 1.5 months, followed by oral antibiotics for at least 3 to 6 months. And in few patients, it may go up to life. So coming to my next topic, that is carotid artery dissection. So dissection is defined as disruption of intima, which allows blood to extravasate between the layers of the vessel wall. So this intramural hematoma extends distally, leading to stenosis or occlusion of the distal circulation. So in these patients, the most common problem is increased thromboembolic events, and the types of dissections, it might be spontaneous or traumatic or iatrogenic. So coming to the spontaneous carotid artery dissection, the incidence is nearly 1.7 to 2.6%, and it is most commonly seen in third to fifth decade of life, and there is no general predilection. And generally, women present at a earlier age compared to the men. That is nearly 5 years. And coming to the pathogenesis, generally spontaneous dissection can occur in any artery in the body, but the most commonly involved arteries are carotid and vertebral arteries, because carotid artery is mobile, that segment is mobile, and many bony structures are present nearby. Chances of injury of this carotid artery are high, and this might be one of the cause for carotid artery dissection. And chiropractic manipulation is also one of the cause for carotid and vertebral artery dissections. So, and in all the patients with spontaneous carotid artery dissections, 25% have connective tissue disorders like Ehlers-Danlos or Marfan syndrome, and they might be presenting to us with neck pain. And these spontaneous dissection patients might not be having any atherosclerotic risk factors, smoking, diabetes mellitus, or hypercholesterolemia, or other OCP use. But there is a high link between hypertension and migraine with spontaneous carotid dissection. Generally, the spontaneous carotid dissection is seen in winter season, and nearly 58% of the patients are associated with a recent upper respiratory or ear infection. And these all the patients with spontaneous carotid dissection mostly are associated with other vascular anomalies like aortic root dilatation, arterial redundancy, increased distensibility of arteries, and other causes. So, coming to the clinical features, there will be ipsilateral headache or neck pain, ipsilateral partial Horner syndrome, and in case of vertebral dissection, there might be nausea. There might be hemispheric symptoms, as well as patient might be presenting with anisocoria, amaurosis, or pulsatile tinnitus, as well as palsies of cranial nerves 11 and 12. So, coming to the second thing, that is traumatic carotid artery dissections. It is mostly after a blunt trauma or head and neck injuries. So, in all the patients presenting with a blunt trauma, the incidence of internal carotid artery dissection is nearly 0.86%, whereas in specific head and neck injury patients with altered conscience, the incidence of carotid artery dissection is nearly 3.2%. And the most common mechanism for carotid dissection is hyperextension or lateral hyperflexion. And coming to the clinical features after trauma, most of the patients might be asymptomatic, and they might be presenting after 1 or 2 days with the lateralizing symptoms like headache, neck pain, hemiparesis, hemiplegia, dysphagia, and aphasia. So, if the patients are having any of the conditions like Horner syndrome, lateralizing transient ischemia, or stroke, or if there is any cervical spine fracture, or if the GCS is less than 6 or basilar skull fracture, then this warrants an urgent investigation to rule out any carotid dissection or other injuries. So, all the patients having these symptoms should be investigated, and any cause should be ruled out in these patients before treating them. So coming to the diagnostic evaluation, like other like aneurysm only, initial investigation is duplex, followed by CT and MR angio, and four vessel selective angiography is the gold standard previously, but of late CT angio is the modality which recognize, sorry, MR angio is the modality which recognizes carotid dissection. So this is the image showing dissection of the internal carotid artery with reformation just the distal internal carotid artery. There is reformation of the distal internal carotid artery. So generally, cerebral infarction is documented in nearly 42% of the spontaneous dissections, and out of this, nearly 60% have persistent neurological deficits, and mortality rate is as high as 30% in this traumatic carotid dissections. This might be because of other antecedent causes or other reasons, and nearly permanent neurological deficit is seen in 20% of the patients following blunt trauma to carotids, and nearly 2/3 of the dissections resolve spontaneously, and the complications are also very less. And generally, prognosis is worse in traumatic carotid dissections, whereas spontaneous carotid dissections fare bit well, and complications are also very less in spontaneous carotid dissections. And prognosis after stroke caused by dissection is worse than stroke caused by atherosclerosis. And according to CADIS, there is no evidence of increased recurrent stroke in patients with carotid dissections, and patients treated with the medical management are equally faring compared to patients managed with surgical interventions, and patients with stroke caused by dissection are younger with fewer vascular effects in a traumatic thing, and medical management can be tried in patients with serial monitoring, and if there is no progression of the dissection, or if there is no aneurysm formation, these patients can be monitored with medical management can be tried with antithrombotic therapy, and there is no consensus between anticoagulation and antiplatelets, and studies are being done, but chances of intracerebral bleed is high in anticoagulation and compared to antiplatelets, and outcome is not that different between anticoagulation and antiplatelet therapy. So antiplatelets can be tried in all the patients with carotid dissection with serial monitoring, and if there is no disease progression, then this can be continued. So coming to the surgical treatment, indications for surgical treatment in carotid artery dissection are if there is fluctuating or deteriorating clinical neurological condition despite medical therapy, or if there is compromised blood flow to the cerebrum, or if there are any contraindications to antithrombotic therapy, or if there is dissecting aneurysm which is expanding, then the patients we can do surgical intervention in these patients. So these surgical interventions indications are both for open surgery as well as endovascular thing. And in patients who are managed with medical management, and after 6 months, the indications are generally persistent high-grade stenosis, new or persistent aneurysm, which is twice the diameter of internal carotid artery, or if there is any enlarging aneurysm or rupture, or if there is any source of distal embolization, that is some unstable clot in the aneurysm, if sac, then these patients needs to be treated surgically. So generally, ligation can be done in these patients if the stump pressure is more than 70 mm of Hc, or interposition vein graft with repair can be done in these patients, like carotid aneurysm. And post-op complications are like ipsilateral stroke is nearly 8%, mortality is 2%, and 20% of the reconstructions, there is the primary patency is not seen in these patients. And cranial nerve palsy is the most common complication seen in these patients. Coming to the endovascular therapy, self-expanding stents can be placed in these patients by opposing the dissecting segment to the normal segment. And these patients should be treated preoperatively and postoperatively with antiplatelets. And intraoperatively, heparin should be used. And coming to the surgical outcomes, patients managed with conservative management are faring better compared to carotid ligation surgical with high rates of cranial nerve palsy in these patients. And in an endovascular thing, as it is minimally invasive and cranial nerve injuries are very less, it's better to go ahead and do endovascular procedures if feasible in these patients when compared to open surgical interventions. And spontaneous carotid dissections follow a very benign course and can be safely managed conservatively with antiplatelets. So this is the image where double stent, bare metal stent was inserted with good flow post operatively. Thank you, sir.